The metallic clang of the Barrett M82 echoed across the Fort Carson long-range rifle qualification course as Master Sergeant Cole slammed his fist down on the equipment table. His 6'3" frame cast a shadow over the woman adjusting the Leopold Mark V scope with methodical precision. Who authorized a civilian to touch our weapons? His voice carried the hardness of 20 years in force recon, each word sharp enough to cut steel. The woman didn't look up. Her fingers continued their work on the elevation knob, making micro-adjustments measured in precise mil-radians. Dakota Sawyer, according to the contractor badge clipped to her light gray t-shirt, appeared utterly unremarkable at first glance. 5'6", maybe 130 pounds, with light brown hair pulled into a messy high bun that left a few loose curls framing her face. The kind of stunningly beautiful woman you might see at a coffee shop rather than a military firing range. Fair porcelain skin, dotted with natural freckles across her cheeks and nose, a high, sharp nose bridge that gave her profile an aristocratic quality, and captivating green eyes that remained focused on her task. I was assigned by Captain Morrison to prepare equipment for today's sniper qualification assessment, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The fitted light gray t-shirt and slim dark military pants she wore seemed to hang loose on her frame, as if she'd lost weight recently. Her brown combat boots were scuffed but clean. Paper pusher. Sergeant Davis laughed from behind Cole, his ranger scroll prominent on his right shoulder. Another diversity hire. Tell me, sweetheart, what does a civilian contractor know about 50 caliber precision rifles? 4 more rangers had gathered now, their combined presence forming a semicircle around Dakota's workstation. Each man stood over 6 feet tall, muscles coiled beneath their ACUs, creating a wall of camouflage and testosterone. The morning Colorado wind whipped across the range, carrying the scent of gun oil and CLP, making the range flag snap in 15-knot gusts. Specialist Chen, seated at the scoring table 20 feet away, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His fingers paused over the keyboard where he'd been entering shooter data for the qualification. The young soldier's eyes darted between the confrontation and his screen, clearly wanting no part of what was developing, but unable to look away entirely. Dakota set the rifle down with careful precision, her movements deliberately slow and non-confrontational. She took a step back from the table, her green eyes briefly noting the Force Recon Challenge coin, visible in Cole's chest pocket. 2nd Battalion, the date stamp reading August 2009. Something flickered across her expression for just a fraction of a second before returning to neutral. I'll work on the other stations, she said quietly, moving toward a different rifle setup 30 feet away. But what would unfold over the next 20 minutes would completely shatter every assumption these elite soldiers had made about the quiet woman they'd dismissed as just another civilian contractor. Cole followed her, his boots striking the concrete with deliberate force. Station assignments are already set. You prep what you're told to prep. He grabbed the equipment checklist from her hands, the paper crinkling under his grip. Says here, you're supposed to have all 5 positions ready for 0700 hours. It's now 0620. You're already behind schedule. Dakota's response was measured, professional. The equipment arrived late from the armory. I've been here since 0430 setting up what was available. Excuses. Davis shook his head, joining his sergeant. Typical civilian mindset. In the teams, we make it happen regardless of obstacles. The range stretched out behind them. 2,000 meters of Colorado high desert terrain, with steel targets positioned at intervals from 100 to 1,600 meters. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the qualification lanes, and heat mirages were already beginning to shimmer in the distance despite the cool morning temperature of 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Lieutenant Rodriguez emerged from the range office, his sniper tab visible above his 10th Mountain Division patch. The Hispanic officer carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan behind a rifle scope. He surveyed the scene, immediately reading the tension. Sawyer, I need all 5 shooting positions operational in 30 minutes. General Webb moved up his inspection time. His tone was neutral but firm. Can you make that happen? Yes, sir. Dakota's response was immediate, though Cole noticed she didn't use the civilian yes, but rather the military affirmative that rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. She's not going to manage that alone, Cole interjected, not with proper setup procedures. Each Barrett weighs 30 pounds, plus optics, plus ammunition cases. That's over 80 pounds of gear per station. Rodriguez looked at Dakota expectantly. She simply nodded. "I'll have it ready, Lieutenant." Without another word, she moved to the first equipment case. The Pelican case alone weighed 40 pounds loaded. Dakota bent her knees, kept her back straight, and lifted with a technique that was textbook military, not the awkward struggle of someone unused to moving heavy equipment. She carried it 50 meters to the first shooting position without stopping, her breathing controlled and even. Cole watched with narrowed eyes. "Trying to prove something, contractor?" Dakota didn't respond, already returning for the next case. As she worked, Specialist Chen noticed something odd. The way she organized the equipment wasn't random. She laid out each item in the exact sequence a sniper would need them during qualification. Rifle, optics, ammunition, wind meter, data book, ranging calculator. It was the kind of systematic approach drilled into military marksmen through thousands of repetitions. Staff Sergeant Thompson, an older veteran with graying temples and a bronze star on his chest, had wandered over from the pistol range. He leaned against the observation tower, arms crossed, watching Dakota work with an expression of growing interest. The man had spent 15 years in special operations before transferring to training command, and something about the woman's movements had caught his attention. "Hey, sweetheart!" Davis called out, as Dakota struggled slightly with a particularly heavy ammunition case. "Need some help? Maybe this job requires someone with actual upper body strength." Dakota paused, set the case down carefully, and did something unexpected. She reached into the case and pulled out 5 boxes of .50 caliber ammunition, each weighing approximately 5 pounds. Instead of making multiple trips, she stacked them in her arms with a specific grip, fingers interlocked beneath, elbows tight to her body, weight distributed across her core rather than her arms. It was a technique Thompson recognized immediately, one taught in advanced infantry training for ammunition resupply under fire. She walked the 100-meter distance to the furthest shooting position without dropping her load or stopping to readjust. When she set the ammunition down, she arranged the boxes with match-grade rounds separated from standard ball ammunition, each box positioned so the lot numbers were visible for logging. "Huh," Thompson murmured to himself, pushing off from the tower. Meanwhile, Sergeant Baker, the 4th member of Cole's Ranger Squad, had picked up one of the rifles Dakota had already positioned. He examined it with the critical eye of someone looking for mistakes. "Safety's on, chambers clear, optics mounted correctly," he admitted grudgingly. "But I bet she doesn't even know what MOA versus MRAD means for scope adjustments." Cole saw an opportunity. "Good point, Baker." "Hey, contractor," he called Dakota over as she returned from setting up the 3rd position. "Since you're handling precision rifle equipment, why don't you explain to these recruits the difference between minute of angle and milliradian adjustments? You know, for educational purposes." 6 junior soldiers from the marksmanship course had gathered to observe the qualification setup. They looked between Cole and Dakota with barely concealed anticipation for what seemed like an inevitable humiliation. Dakota wiped her hands on her pants, leaving small dust marks on the dark fabric. When she spoke, her voice remained quiet, but something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring just a fraction, chin lifting slightly. Minute of angle, or MOA, represents 1/60th of 1 degree in a circle. At 100 yards, 1 MOA equals approximately 1.047 inches of adjustment. Most American scopes use quarter MOA clicks, meaning 4 clicks equal 1 inch of adjustment at 100 yards. She paused, her green eyes meeting Cole's directly for the first time. Milliradian, or MRAD, is based on the radian measurement system, where there are 6.283 radians in a circle, divided into 1,000 milliradians. At 100 meters, 1 mil equals 10 centimeters of adjustment. The advantage of MRAD is that it's base 10, making range estimation and holdover calculations simpler for trained shooters, especially when working with metric measurements common in NATO operations. The recruits exchanged glances. Cole's jaw tightened slightly. Dakota continued, her voice gaining just a hint of confidence. "For the Barrett M82, most military applications use MRAD scopes because the math is cleaner for long-range engagement calculations. If you're engaging a target at 1,500 meters with a 10-knot crosswind, the MRAD system allows faster mental calculation of hold-off without consulting ballistic charts." Anyone can memorize textbook definitions, Davis interjected, trying to salvage the moment. Doesn't mean she understands practical application. Thompson had moved closer now, close enough to hear the full exchange. He noticed something else, Dakota's stance. While appearing relaxed, her weight was distributed evenly on both feet, knees slightly bent, ready to move in any direction. It was a shooter's stance, so natural she probably wasn't even aware she was doing it. Captain Morrison emerged from the range office, his Special Forces tab catching the morning sun. Listen up. General Webb will be here at 0800 hours instead of 0900. I want this range looking perfect. Every rifle zeroed, every position squared away, all data books ready for inspection. The announcement sent a ripple of urgency through the gathered soldiers. General Marcus Webb wasn't just any flag officer. He was commander of FORCECOM, a legendary figure who'd earned his stars in Iraq and Afghanistan. More importantly for the soldiers present, he was known for his exacting standards and zero tolerance for subpar performance. Cole immediately shifted his attention from Dakota to his own squad's preparation, but not before adding, "Make sure those rifles are actually functional, contractor. The general won't be impressed by pretty-looking equipment that doesn't work." Dakota simply nodded and returned to her task. As she worked on the fourth shooting position, she pulled out a small notebook from her back pocket. Chen, who had moved closer to update his scoring sheets, caught a glimpse of the pages. They were filled with detailed range cards, hand-drawn terrain features, distance measurements, wind patterns for different times of day at Fort Carson, the kind of detailed documentation a sniper would create for a frequently used range. "Excuse me, ma'am," Chen said quietly, careful not to draw Cole's attention. "Those range cards, they're incredibly detailed. Did someone give those to you?" Dakota looked at the young specialist for a moment before answering. "I like to be thorough in my work." Chen noticed something else, the callus patterns on Dakota's hands. Civilians who worked with tools had calluses, sure, but these were specific. Her right thumb had a thick callus from operating a rifle bolt. Her trigger finger had the telltale indent from thousands of precise pulls. Her support hand showed the wear patterns from gripping a rifle sling in the loop position. "Your hands," Chen started to say, but Dakota had already moved away, carrying another piece of equipment to the final shooting position. The wind had picked up now, gusting to 20 knots. The range flag snapped violently, and dust devils danced across the desert scrub beyond the targets. Most of the soldiers pulled their patrol caps lower, turned their faces away from the blowing sand. Dakota, however, looked directly into the wind, reading the patterns in the flags. The way the dust moved at different distances, the slight variation in mirage between the 1,000 and 1,500-meter marks. Rodriguez had been watching her too. "Sawyer, have you worked rifle ranges before? Your setup is remarkably efficient." Before Dakota could answer, Cole interrupted. "Efficient? She's got the rifles facing the wrong direction at Station 3. Everyone turned to look. Dakota walked over to Station 3, examined the setup, then looked back at Cole. The rifles are positioned to compensate for the 17-degree offset in the shooting lane. At extended distances, that offset becomes significant for calculating hold-off. By angling the rifle during initial setup, the shooter can maintain a more natural position while accounting for the terrain feature. She pointed to a subtle rise in the terrain about 800 meters out. That berm creates a wind funnel effect. Wind coming from the west accelerates through that gap, adding approximately 3 to 4 knots to the prevailing wind speed. The angled setup allows the shooter to observe the far wind flag while maintaining sight picture. Rodriguez walked over to verify her observation. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "That's actually correct. That's a level of range analysis I'd expect from someone who's spent significant time behind a scope." "Lucky guess," Davis muttered, but his tone lacked conviction. Thompson spoke up for the first time. "That's not a guess. That's experience talking." All eyes turned to the older staff sergeant. He walked over to Dakota, his movements deliberate. "The way you move, the way you lift, the way you observe this range. You've done this before. Military?" Dakota's expression remained carefully neutral. "I'm just a contractor, Staff Sergeant. I observe and learn quickly." Thompson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Sure you do." By now, it was 0655. All 5 shooting positions were ready, each one set up with meticulous precision. The rifles gleamed in the morning sun, optics perfectly aligned, ammunition arranged by lot number, data books open to fresh pages with pencils sharpened, and backup pens ready. It was a level of preparation that would have taken most teams of 2 or 3 soldiers the same amount of time to achieve. Lieutenant Rodriguez conducted a quick inspection, checking each position against his requirements list. Outstanding work, Sawyer. Honestly, this is better than most military teams manage. Cole wasn't ready to concede anything. Setup is one thing, but when the shooting starts, we'll see how well this equipment actually functions. I'm betting she doesn't even know how to clear a malfunction on a Barrett. As if on cue, one of the junior soldiers who had been examining the rifles at position 2 called out, "Sergeant Cole, this rifle just jammed. Bolt won't go fully into battery." Cole smiled triumphantly. "Well, contractor, your equipment, your problem. Show us how a civilian handles a weapon malfunction." The gathered soldiers formed a loose circle around position 2, eager to witness what they assumed would be Dakota's fumbling attempt to resolve the issue. The Barrett's bolt was stuck partially open, a problem that could have several causes: ammunition obstruction, damaged bolt face, or firing pin issue. Dakota approached the rifle with the same calm she'd displayed all morning. She didn't immediately grab for the weapon. Instead, she observed it from multiple angles, noting the bolt's exact position, checking the chamber visibility, examining the magazine well. Her movements were methodical, professional. "May I?" she asked Rodriguez, who nodded permission. Dakota engaged the rifle's safety, removed the magazine with practiced ease, and locked the bolt to the rear. She tilted the rifle, using the morning sunlight to illuminate the chamber. Her fingers found the forward assist without looking, a muscle memory action that made Thompson lean forward with increased interest. "Brass shaving caught in the bolt lug," she announced quietly. She produced a Gerber multi-tool from her pocket, extended the pick tool, and with surgical precision extracted a tiny piece of brass that had wedged itself in exactly the right spot to prevent bolt closure. The entire process took 7 seconds. "Range record for clearing that particular malfunction is 12 seconds, Rodriguez said slowly, "and that was set by a special operations sniper instructor." Dakota reassembled the rifle, performed a function check, and stepped back. "Rifle's operational, Lieutenant." The silence that followed this was heavy with reassessment. Chen had actually started a timer on his phone when Dakota began, and he stared at the display showing 7.3 seconds in disbelief. Sergeant Baker, trying to salvage some pride for the Ranger contingent, picked up a wind meter from the equipment table. "All right, so she can clear a jam. But reading wind at distance, that's what separates real shooters from equipment technicians. What's the wind call for a shot at 1,400 meters right now?" Dakota didn't reach for the wind meter. Instead, she studied the range flags, the mirage patterns, the dust patterns at various distances. She wet her finger and held it up, but not in the amateur way most people did. She held it at specific angles, reading the evaporation rate on different sides. Prevailing wind at the shooting position is 8 knots from 270 degrees. At 400 meters, the gap in the terrain feature creates a Venturi effect, accelerating wind to approximately 12 knots and shifting direction to 250 degrees. At 800 meters, the thermal rising from that dark rock formation creates a vertical component, adding approximately 2 mils of vertical displacement. At 1,400 meters, you're dealing with 14 knots steady with gusts to 18. But the real challenge is the switch between 1,100 and 1,300 meters, where the wind shifts direction by approximately 15 degrees due to the terrain channeling effect. She paused, calculating in her head. For a standard 175 grain match round from a Barrett with a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second, you'd need approximately 3.7 miles left hold at 1,400 meters, with an additional half mil for the gust variation. Elevation would be 14.2 mils up, accounting for the density altitude at this elevation. We're at 6,000 feet above sea level, temperatures 52 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity approximately 15%. Baker stood frozen, the wind meter still in his hand. Rodriguez pulled out his ballistic calculator, inputted the variables Dakota had mentioned. After a moment, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "She's within 0.1 mil on all calculations, without using any instruments." "How?" Davis's question came out as barely more than a whisper. Before anyone could respond, Chen spoke up from his position at the scoring table. "I ran a search on our contractor database while you were talking." He looked uncomfortable, but continued. "Dakota Sawyer has been a contractor here for 6 months. Before that, her record shows nothing. Just a basic security clearance approval and medical clearance. No prior employment history, no educational background, nothing. That's impossible, Cole said, snatching the tablet from Chen. Everyone has a history. Chen pulled up another screen. That's what I thought. So, I dug deeper. Her file has a classification marker. See this? He pointed to a small notation in the corner of the screen. That only appears when someone's real records are sealed at a level way above our pay grade. The group exchanged uncertain glances. Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of experience. I've seen that marker exactly 3 times in 20 years. Once was for a Delta operator working undercover. Once was for a CIA operative in civilian cover. He paused, looking directly at Dakota. And once was for someone from a unit that technically doesn't exist. Dakota remained silent, her expression giving away nothing. She simply returned to checking the equipment, as if the conversation wasn't happening around her. Captain Morrison returned from the range office, breaking the tension. General Webb's convoy just passed the main gate, 10 minutes out. I want everyone at their positions. Cole, your team is scheduled for the first qualification round. Get your shooters ready. The Rangers dispersed to prepare, but Cole lingered, staring at Dakota with a mixture of suspicion and something else, perhaps the first hint of uncertainty. This isn't over, he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. Dakota looked up at him, and for just a moment, something flickered in her green eyes. Not fear, not anger, but something else entirely. Something that made Cole, a man who had faced Taliban fighters in hand-to-hand combat, take an involuntary step back. It never is, she replied, so quietly he almost missed it. As Cole walked away, Thompson approached Dakota. That breathing pattern you've been using all morning, box breathing. 4 counts in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. They teach that at sniper school for managing heart rate during long shots. Dakota's hands paused in their work for just a fraction of a second before continuing. Lots of stress management techniques use controlled breathing, Staff Sergeant. Thompson smiled slightly. True, but not many people do it so naturally they're not even aware they're doing it. And that shooting stance you keep dropping into, textbook Hawkins position. Named after Staff Sergeant James Hawkins, who developed it in 2003 for urban sniper operations in Iraq. He paused. Funny thing is, they only taught that position in one place, the Army's Tier 1 sniper program, the one that officially doesn't exist. Dakota finally looked up at him. You seem to know a lot about things that don't exist. 20 years in special operations teaches you to recognize your own kind, Thompson replied, even when they're trying very hard not to be recognized. Before Dakota could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching drew everyone's attention. 3 black Suburbans pulled into the range parking area, their engines shutting off in unison. General Marcus Webb stepped out of the middle vehicle, his 4-star insignia catching the morning sun. At 62 years old, Webb moved with the purposeful stride of someone who'd spent more time in combat zones than conference rooms. His gray hair was cut regulation short, and his eyes, sharp blue and penetrating, swept across the range with practiced assessment. 2 aides flanked him, and a small security detail spread out, though this was Fort Carson, as secure as any military installation could be. Webb's presence immediately changed the atmosphere. Soldiers straightened unconsciously, weapons were held with extra care, and voices dropped to professional levels. Captain Morrison, Webb's voice carried across the range without shouting. Outstanding morning for qualification. Yes, sir, Morrison responded, meeting the general at the range entrance. We have 5 shooters from 3rd Battalion ready for certification, plus 3 from the Ranger Reconnaissance Element. As Webb conducted his initial inspection, Dakota quietly continued her equipment checks, deliberately keeping herself peripheral to the main activity. She had positioned herself at the far end of the range, ostensibly organizing ammunition supplies, but Thompson noticed her sight lines. She could observe everything while appearing focused on her task. Cole and his Rangers had taken their positions at the firing line. They looked impressive, squared away, professional, their match-grade rifles gleaming with meticulous care. Cole himself had taken position 1, his spotter, Sergeant Davis, already set up with high-power binoculars and a data book. Commence firing when ready, Rodriguez announced. The Rangers began their qualification sequence. Cole's first shot rang out, a solid hit at 500 meters. His second shot at 800 meters struck 2 inches from center. By any standard, it was excellent shooting. The other Rangers performed similarly, their years of training evident in every controlled trigger squeeze. Webb observed through his own binoculars, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. After the Rangers completed their 1,000-meter shots, he lowered his optics. "Solid shooting, Master Sergeant. Your men are well trained." Cole stood, pride evident in his bearing. "Thank you, sir. We maintain the highest standards in the Ranger Regiment." As the general continued his inspection tour, moving toward the equipment area, Dakota tried to make herself even less visible, focusing intently on arranging ammunition boxes that were already perfectly arranged. But as Webb passed the table where she worked, his stride faltered for just a moment. His eyes had caught something, a small pin on Dakota's collar, barely visible where her contractor badge lanyard crossed her shirt. It was tiny, easy to miss, designed to be overlooked. But Webb's sharp eyes had been trained to notice details that others missed. The pin was no bigger than a dime, depicting a human skull viewed through crosshairs, with the crosshairs centered on the skull's eye socket. To anyone unfamiliar, it might look like some kind of edgy fashion statement or military surplus memorabilia. But Webb knew better. He stopped cold. His aides, unprepared for the sudden halt, nearly bumped into him. The security detail tensed, hands moving imperceptibly closer to weapons, scanning for threats. Webb stood perfectly still for 3 long seconds, his eyes fixed on that pin. The color had drained from his face, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "That pin!" Everyone on the range turned to look. Cole and his Rangers, Rodriguez, Morrison, Thompson, all eyes followed Webb's gaze to Dakota, who had gone completely still, her green eyes meeting the general's with an expression of resigned recognition. Webb took a step closer, his voice stronger now, but filled with something that sounded almost like awe. "That's a Ghost 7 pin." The words hit the assembled soldiers like a physical blow. Ghost 7 was a legend, a myth, a unit that supposedly didn't exist. Stories about them circulated in hushed tones among special operations forces. 12 snipers who operated beyond Black Ops, beyond Tier 1, beyond anything officially acknowledged. Some said they were CIA trained, others claimed they answered directly to the president. Most believed they were just stories, legends created to inspire and intimidate. "Ghost 7 doesn't exist," Cole said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. Webb never took his eyes off Dakota. "Stand up, contractor." Dakota rose slowly, her movements fluid despite the tension radiating through her body. Standing at her full height, the light gray t-shirt pulled slightly, revealing more of the pin. Now that attention was focused on it, the detail was remarkable. The skull was anatomically perfect, the crosshairs precisely etched, and barely visible around the edge were 12 stars, each one supposedly representing a member of the unit. "What's your name?" Webb asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be complete. "Dakota Sawyer, sir. Civilian contractor, equipment maintenance." Webb studied her face, the high cheekbones, the green eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing, the casual stance that somehow managed to be both relaxed and ready for action. "Sawyer," Webb repeated slowly. "And before you were Dakota Sawyer?" Dakota remained silent. Webb reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through it for a moment, then held it up. The screen showed a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance with a surveillance camera. It showed a figure in a ghillie suit, barely visible against Afghan terrain, behind a Barrett M82. The photo's metadata showed a date, August 15th, 2019. Location, classified. Operation, Mountain Resolve. 1,473 meters, Webb said quietly. Through a bus window, moving target. 15-knot crosswind with gusts to 25. Density altitude of 8,000 feet. One shot. He paused. That shot saved 30 Marines, including my convoy. The range had gone completely silent except for the wind snapping the range flags. The shooter's designation was Reaper, the only female sniper ever admitted to Ghost 7, Webb's voice carried across the range. 47 confirmed kills over 6 deployments, 11 high-value targets, 3 silver stars, though the citations are so classified they're not even in the system. Left the service 2 years ago, disappeared completely. Dakota's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sir, I'm just a contractor." "The shot that saved my convoy," Webb interrupted, "required calculating for not just wind and distance, but for the refraction of light through treated bus window glass, the movement speed of the vehicle, and the elevation changes over uneven terrain. The margin for error was less than half an inch. There are maybe 5 people in the world who could have made that shot. 4 of them are men, and I know where all of them are. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only those nearest could hear. The 5th is standing right in front of me. Cole's mouth had fallen open. Davis looked like someone had hit him with a brick. Even the composed Rodriguez seemed stunned. Thompson, however, was nodding slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle had finally clicked into place. "Sir," Dakota said quietly, "I'm no longer—" "Once go 7, always go 7, Webb said firmly. "You don't leave that unit. You might stop operating, but you never stop being what they made you." He paused, studying her face. "Why are you here, working as a contractor?" For the first time since the morning began, Dakota's composed mask cracked slightly. "My daughter, sir. She was diagnosed with leukemia. I needed stable hours, good insurance, and to be present for her treatment." Webb's expression softened marginally. "How is she?" "Remission, sir. 6 months now." The general nodded, then turned to address the range. "Gentlemen, you're looking at one of the most lethal precision shooters the United States military has ever produced. Her real name is classified, her service record is sealed beyond even my level, and her actual kill count is probably double what's officially acknowledged." He turned back to Dakota. "Reaper, I have just one question. Can you still shoot?" Dakota was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes distant, perhaps seeing sand-swept Afghan mountains or Iraqi urban sprawls. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "There's only one way to find out, sir." Webb smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. "Master Sergeant Cole, loan the contractor your rifle." Cole looked like he wanted to protest but couldn't find words. He stepped aside from his shooting position, his custom-tuned Barrett suddenly feeling inadequate in his hands. Dakota walked to the firing line with the measured pace of someone approaching a familiar but complicated relationship. She didn't immediately pick up the rifle. Instead, she studied the range conditions again. Wind, light, mirage. Her fingers traced the air, reading currents invisible to most observers. When she finally picked up the Barrett, the transformation was immediate and complete. The rifle seemed to become part of her, an extension of her body. She settled into a prone position with a fluidity that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Her breathing slowed, that box-breathing pattern Thompson had noticed becoming more pronounced. "Target distance?" she asked Rodriguez. "Start at 1,000 meters, work out to maximum effective range." Dakota nodded, making minute adjustments to the scope without looking at the adjustment knobs. Her fingers knew every click by feel. She chambered around with economical precision. The entire range held its breath. Her finger found the trigger, taking up the slack with practiced ease. Between heartbeats, in that moment of perfect stillness that snipers call the natural respiratory pause, she fired. The round struck dead center at 1,000 meters. Without lifting her eye from the scope, she worked the bolt, chambering the next round. 1,200 meters. Center hit. 1,400 meters. The wind had picked up to 20 knots with variable gusts. Dakota waited, reading the pattern, finding the rhythm of the wind. She fired. Center hit. "Holy—" Davis couldn't finish the exclamation. 1,600 meters. The maximum effective range of the Barrett M82 under ideal conditions. These were not ideal conditions. 20-knot winds, early morning light, creating complex mirage patterns, density altitude approaching 7,000 feet. Dakota made adjustments that seemed impossibly precise, tiny movements that accounted for spin drift, the Coriolis effect, the Magnus effect on the bullet's trajectory. She waited almost 30 seconds, reading conditions none of the other shooters could even perceive. She fired. The spotting scope team confirmed what seemed impossible. Dead center hit at 1,600 meters, but Dakota wasn't done. She looked up at Webb. "Permission to engage the special target, sir?" Webb raised an eyebrow. "The special target hasn't been engaged in 5 years. It's at 1,750 meters, beyond the weapon's official effective range." "I know, sir." Webb nodded slowly. "Permission granted." The special target was a piece of Fort Carson range legend, a 12-inch steel plate positioned at the extreme edge of the range, supposedly unhittable with conventional ammunition. It had been placed there as a challenge, a goal for the best shooters to attempt when conditions were perfect. Conditions were far from perfect now. Dakota studied the range for a full minute, her eyes tracking things others couldn't see. She made adjustments to the scope that seemed excessive. Nearly 20 mils of elevation, 5 mils of windage. She pulled out a small notebook from her pocket, made quick calculations, then adjusted again. "She's holding for a distance that's impossible," Baker whispered. "The bullet will destabilize past 1,700 meters." Dakota heard him, but didn't respond. Instead, she did something unexpected. That's beyond advanced. That's supernatural. Dakota settled back into position. Her breathing slowed even more, to the point where Chen thought she might have stopped breathing entirely. The wind gusted, died, gusted again. She waited and waited. The range was silent except for wind and heartbeats. Then, between one gust and the next, in a moment of relative calm that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, she fired. The sound of the shot echoed across the desert. Everyone strained to see the distant target through spotting scopes and binoculars. 3 seconds passed. 4, 5. Then, barely audible at this distance, the distinctive ring of lead on steel. "Hit!" the spotter called out, disbelief evident in his voice. "Center of plate, 1,750 meters." The range erupted, not in cheers. These were professional soldiers who rarely showed excessive emotion, but in exclamations of disbelief, whispered profanity, quickly self-censored, and amazed head-shaking. Dakota safed the weapon, stood, and handed the rifle back to Cole. "Your zero is off by 0.3 mils left," she said quietly. "You might want to check your scope mounting. The rear ring has a slight cant." Cole took the rifle numbly, unable to formulate a response. General Webb approached Dakota, his expression unreadable. "Reaper, that shot you just made. I've seen exactly 3 people attempt it in my career. One was a Marine Scout sniper instructor who missed by 6 feet. One was a SEAL Team 6 sniper who hit the edge of the plate. The third was a Delta Force operative who refused to try because he said it was impossible." "Nothing's impossible, sir," Dakota replied, "just varying degrees of improbable." Webb studied her for a long moment. "The unit wants you back." "I'm retired, sir." "Ghost 7 doesn't retire. They go dormant." "But when called," he left the sentence hanging. "My daughter needs me, sir. She comes first." Webb nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "What if I told you we could accommodate that? Part-time status. Train our top-tier snipers. Consult on operations. Full benefits, salary commensurate with your skills. You'd be home every night except for essential operations." Dakota was quiet, considering. Cole finally found his voice. "General, with all due respect, how do we know this is real? How can someone like her be what you're claiming?" Webb turned to Cole with an expression that could have frozen water. "Master Sergeant, do you know what the qualification standard is for Ghost 7? "No, sir. 5 shots, 5 kills, at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters in combat conditions. Not range conditions. Combat. Under fire. With lives on the line." He turned back to Dakota. "Reaper exceeded that standard on her qualification test. 5 shots at 1,500 meters while taking incoming mortar fire. 5 kills in 43 seconds. The blood had drained from Cole's face. 43 seconds? From first shot to last, while displacing between shots to avoid counter-sniper fire. Webb pulled out his phone again, showing another photograph. This one was clearer. Dakota in full combat gear, face painted in camouflage, but those distinctive green eyes visible behind the scope of a Barrett. This was taken by a combat photographer during Operation Iron Resolve. The target was a bomb maker who had killed 17 American soldiers. Distance was 1,620 meters through a sandstorm at night using thermal optics that were malfunctioning. 1 shot. He swiped to another photo. "This is from Operation Mountain Resolve, the one where she saved my convoy. You can barely see her position in this surveillance footage, but that's her hide site. She held that position for 72 hours. No relief, no resupply, waiting for the shot that would prevent an ambush." Dakota shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, those operations are classified." "Were classified," Webb corrected. "I had them partially declassified this morning when I recognized you. The families of the Marines you saved deserve to know their guardian angel has a face, even if they'll never know your name." Chen had been furiously typing on his tablet, cross-referencing what little information was available. "Sir, I'm finding references to Ghost 7 operations, but everything is redacted except for results. 17 operations, 100% success rate, 0 friendly casualties when Ghost 7 provided overwatch. That's all you'll find," Webb confirmed. "The details will never be public, but the results speak for themselves." He turned to face the entire range. "This woman has more confirmed kills than any other American female sniper in history. She's saved more American lives through precision elimination of threats than most entire units manage in a deployment. And she did it all while none of you even knew she existed. Rodriguez stepped forward. Ma'am, Reaper, the shot patterns you just demonstrated. Could you teach that? Could you show our snipers how to push past conventional limits? Dakota looked at the assembled soldiers. Cole's stunned disbelief, Davis's growing respect, Thompson's knowing smile, Chen's awe, and Rodriguez's professional interest. The fundamentals never change, she said finally, her voice carrying across the range. Natural point of aim, respiratory pause, trigger control. But what makes the difference between a good shooter and a Ghost 7 operative isn't just technique. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. It's learning to see what others miss. Wind doesn't just blow. It has layers, patterns, rhythms. Light doesn't just illuminate. It bends, refracts, reveals. A target isn't just distance and size. It's movement patterns, psychological tendencies, environmental interaction. Baker, emboldened by her willingness to speak, asked, "How do you calculate all of that in combat conditions?" "You don't calculate," Dakota replied. "You feel it. After enough rounds, enough hours behind the scope, the math becomes instinct. Your body knows the adjustments before your mind finishes the calculation." "Can that be taught?" Rodriguez pressed. Dakota considered. "To the right students? With enough dedication? Some of it, yes." Webb seized the moment. "Then teach it, part-time, on your schedule, with full accommodation for your daughter's needs. The Army needs what you know, Reaper." Before Dakota could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her entire demeanor changed. The professional soldier vanished, replaced by a concerned mother. "Excuse me, sir, it's the hospital." She stepped away, speaking quietly into the phone. The gathered soldiers watched as her shoulders tensed, then gradually relaxed. After a minute, she returned. "Everything all right?" Webb asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Yes, sir. Just test results from my daughter's latest scan. Still clear." Relief was evident in her voice. Webb nodded. "I have a proposition. 3 days a week, you train our top sniper candidates. Full medical benefits, including coverage for your daughter's ongoing monitoring. Housing allowance that would let you move closer to the hospital. And if, only if, a critical operation requires your specific skills, we ask for your help. Voluntary basis only." Dakota was quiet for a long moment, looking out across the range where she'd just made an impossible shot look routine. "I left Ghost 7 for a reason, sir." "I know," Webb said softly. "I read the file. Operation Blackwater. You made the call not to take the shot because there were children in the blast radius. Command overruled you. Another sniper took the shot. 3 children died. The range had gone silent again, the weight of the revelation settling over everyone. You were right to refuse," Webb continued. "The target was eliminated, but the cost was too high. The other sniper left the service 6 months later, couldn't live with it. You did the right thing, even though it cost you your position in the unit." "I would make the same call again," Dakota said firmly. "Which is exactly why we need you training the next generation," Webb replied, "to teach them not just how to shoot, but when not to shoot, the kind of judgment that can't be taught from a manual." Cole, who had been silent through all of this, suddenly spoke up. "I owe you an apology." Everyone turned to look at him. "I disrespected you based on appearance, on assumptions," Cole continued, his voice rough with emotion. "My younger brother was killed by a sniper in Afghanistan. I've carried anger about that for years, and I projected it onto you when I saw you handling sniper equipment. That was wrong." Dakota studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "Kandahar Province, August 2019. Corporal Michael Cole, 2nd Platoon, 1st Battalion." Cole's voice went white. "How did you—" "I was overwatch for that operation," Dakota said softly. "The enemy sniper was in a mosque minaret. I had the shot, but there were civilians in the building. I was working on a solution to flush him out when he took his shot. Your brother was checking on a wounded Afghan child." She paused. "I eliminated the sniper 17 seconds later, but—" 17 seconds too late," Cole finished, his voice hollow. "Yes," Dakota agreed simply. 17 seconds too late." The two stood facing each other, the weight of shared loss hanging between them. Then Cole did something unexpected. He extended his hand. "Thank you for telling me, and thank you for taking him out." Dakota shook his hand, her grip firm. He was a good Marine. The child he was helping survived because of his actions. Cole nodded, unable to speak further. Webb cleared his throat. So, Reaper, will you consider my offer? Dakota looked around the range, at the soldiers who would benefit from her knowledge, at the mountains in the distance that reminded her of Afghanistan, at the rifle she'd just used to make an impossible shot possible. 3 conditions, she said finally. First, my daughter's medical appointments take absolute priority. If she needs me, I'm gone. No questions asked. Agreed, Webb said immediately. Second, I work as an instructor only. I'm not returning to active operations unless American lives are in imminent danger and no one else can make the shot. Agreed. Third, I maintain my contractor cover. As far as anyone outside this range knows, I'm still just Dakota Sawyer, civilian equipment specialist. The moment my daughter becomes a target because of my past, I disappear. Webb considered this. That's going to be difficult to maintain after this morning's display. Then everyone here needs to understand the importance of operational security, Dakota replied, her green eyes scanning the assembled soldiers. What you've learned today doesn't leave this range. Not to wives, not to buddies at the bar, not to anyone. Because the moment my identity becomes public knowledge, I become useless as an asset and vulnerable as a target. Rodriguez spoke up. Ma'am, everyone here understands OPSEC. Your secret's safe. The other soldiers nodded agreement, even Cole and his rangers. Webb extended his hand. Then we have a deal, Reaper. Welcome back to the shadows. Dakota shook his hand, then looked at the soldiers around her. If we're doing this, we start now. Rodriguez, your breathing pattern is causing unnecessary movement. Chen, your spotting scope technique is introducing parallax error. Baker, you're not reading Mirage properly. You're looking at it instead of through it. She moved to the equipment table, picking up a data book. Cole, your range estimation is off because you're not accounting for the fisheye effect of your scope at maximum magnification. Davis, you're jerking the trigger instead of squeezing. I can see it in your shot pattern. Thompson, your fundamentals are solid. You just need confidence in your win calls. Thompson smiled. Figured you'd been watching all of us while we thought we were watching you. First lesson, Dakota said, addressing them all. A sniper sees everything but is seen by no one. You've all been focused on me for the past hour, but how many of you noticed the individual who's been observing from the administration building's roof since 0645? Every head swiveled toward the building. Sure enough, barely visible, was a figure with binoculars. Range security, Dakota identified. Posted there every qualification day, but none of you noticed because you weren't maintaining 360 awareness. She paused. In combat, that lack of awareness gets you killed. On the range, it just makes you sloppy. Webb smiled slightly. Gentlemen, class is in session. As the soldiers gathered closer, eager to absorb whatever knowledge Dakota would share, she picked up the Barrett again, checking its balance. We'll start with the basics, she said. Forget everything you think you know about long-range shooting. We're going to rebuild from the ground up, the Ghost 7 way. By the time I'm done with you, you'll be able to put rounds on target at distances that would make other snipers pack up and go home. She looked at each of them in turn, her green eyes intense. But remember, being a sniper isn't about the kill. It's about the lives you save by being in the right place, at the right time, with the skill to make the shot that matters. The moment you forget that, the moment it becomes about the numbers or the glory, you lose what makes you effective. Ma'am, Chen asked hesitantly, what was it like, being the only woman in Ghost 7? Dakota considered the question. Irrelevant. Behind the scope, gender doesn't matter. Physics doesn't care if you're male or female. Wind reads the same, gravity pulls the same, and bullets fly the same. What matters is dedication, discipline, and the willingness to push past what you think is possible. She paused, then added, though I will say the gear was all designed for men, which was annoying. Try finding tactical pants that fit properly when you're 5'6" with a woman's build. I had to modify everything myself. This drew a small chuckle from the group, breaking some of the remaining tension. Davis raised his hand. The ghillie suit in the photo General Webb showed? Did you make that yourself? Every Ghost 7 operator makes their own, Dakota confirmed. It's part of the selection process. You have 72 hours to construct a suit using only materials found in your operational environment. Then you have to remain undetected for 48 hours while instructors actively hunt for you. If you're spotted, you're out. How many people make it through selection? Rodriguez asked. I can't give specific numbers, Dakota replied, but I can tell you that in the unit's entire history, fewer than 50 people have worn the Ghost 7 insignia. We lost 3 during my time, 2 in combat, 1 in a training accident. The mood sobered at this reminder of the cost of such elite service. Ma'am, Cole said, his tone respectful now, that shot you made at 1750. Can you walk us through your thought process? Dakota nodded, moving to the spotting scope. First, understand that at that distance, you're not shooting at the target. You're shooting at where the target will be when the bullet arrives. At 1,750 meters, with a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second, flight time is approximately 2.7 seconds. She pointed to various positions on the range. In that time, wind can push the bullet up to 40 inches off course. The bullet drops nearly 30 feet from boreline. The Earth rotates approximately 4 inches at this latitude. Yes, you have to account for the Earth's rotation at extreme distances. The soldiers were taking notes now, some recording on phones with permission. But the real key, Dakota continued, is reading the wind, not just at your position, not just at the target, but at multiple points along the bullet's flight path. See those flags? They're showing different wind speeds and directions at each distance marker. You need to create a mental map of the bullet's entire journey. She picked up a data book, sketching rapidly. Wind at shooting position, 8 knots from 270, at 500 meters, 12 knots from 250, at 1,000 meters, 15 knots from 240. At 1,500, back to 10 knots from 270, your bullet is going to trace an S-curve through the air. That's impossible to calculate in real time, Baker protested. Not calculate, Dakota corrected. Feel. After enough practice, your brain processes it subconsciously. You see the pattern and your body knows the hold. It's like a quarterback throwing into coverage. They don't calculate trajectories. They just know where the ball needs to go. Webb had been watching this impromptu lesson with satisfaction. Reaper, I need to continue my inspection, but I'll have the paperwork for your new position ready by end of day. Captain Morrison will handle the administrative details. Dakota nodded. Yes, sir. As Webb prepared to leave, he turned back one more time. Oh, and Reaper, that pin you're wearing. You might want to keep it more concealed. Only a few dozen people in the world would recognize it, but those who do might ask uncomfortable questions. Dakota's hand went to the pin reflexively. I thought I'd lost it years ago. Found it last week in an old gear bag. I shouldn't have worn it, but some things we can't let go of, no matter how hard we try, Webb finished. I understand. Just be careful. After the general's convoy departed, the atmosphere on the range shifted. The soldiers who remained looked at Dakota with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and something approaching awe. Thompson broke the silence. So, when do we start training? Really training? Dakota looked at the group. Shooting is only 10% of the job. 90% is getting into position without being seen and getting out alive. We're going to play a game. She pointed to the expanse of scrub brush and uneven terrain stretching out to the 1,000-meter line. I'm going to move out into that terrain. You give me a 20-minute head start. Your job is to find me using your spotting scopes and binoculars. I will fire a blank shot every 5 minutes to give you a directional cue. And if we spot you, Cole asked. You won't, Dakota said simply. But if you do, call out the grid coordinate. If you're right, I buy drinks tonight. If you're wrong, or if I make it back to this position without being identified, your entire squad cleans the latrines for a week. She grabbed her ghillie hood, a minimal piece of gear, not a full suit, and vanished into a drainage ditch. 20 minutes later, the soldiers were scanning the terrain with intensity. The heat mirage made everything shimmer. Bang! The blank shot echoed from somewhere near the 600-meter berm. Got her! Davis shouted. Movement near the dead tree grid 447. Rodriguez checked through the high-powered spotter. Negative, that's a tumbleweed caught in the brush. Minutes ticked by. Another shot, this time closer, maybe 400 meters. The soldiers were sweating, eyes straining. They were the best observers in their units, yet the terrain seemed empty. She's ghosting us, Thompson muttered. She's moving right under our noses. Suddenly a voice spoke from directly behind them. Bang! Every soldier jumped and spun around. Dakota was lying prone on top of the shipping container they were using for shade, not 10 feet away from where they were standing. She had circled the entire perimeter, crawled through a culvert they thought was impassable, and climbed the container while they were focused downrange. You were all looking for a target, Dakota said, sliding down. You should have been looking for a disturbance in the environment. The birds stopped singing in the east sector 10 minutes ago. That was your alert. Cole looked at her with a mix of frustration and awe. You crawled through the cactus patch? Dakota picked a spine out of her sleeve. Pain is information. It tells you you're still alive. Focus on the mission, not the discomfort. Now, let's fix your shooting positions. Chen, step forward. Chen, what did you observe about my shooting position earlier? Chen consulted his notes. You used a modified Hawkins position, but your support arm was positioned differently than standard. Good observation. Why? Chen thought about it. To reduce muscle tension over extended periods? Partially correct. Also to allow for rapid position adjustment without losing sight picture. At extreme ranges, you might need to track a target across several degrees of arc. The traditional position locks you in too rigidly. She moved to demonstrate, dropping into position with the same fluid grace they had witnessed earlier. See how my elbow creates a pivot point? I can sweep 15 degrees left or right without major body adjustment. In urban environments, that could mean the difference between tracking a target across multiple windows or losing them. Over the next hour, as the sun climbed higher and the desert heat began to build, Dakota worked with each shooter individually. She identified flaws in their techniques that had gone unnoticed for years, suggested minor adjustments that yielded major improvements, and shared insights that weren't in any manual. With Rodriguez, she corrected a subtle cant in his scope mounting that had been throwing his extreme range shots left. With Baker, she identified a breathing pattern that was causing vertical stringing in his groups. With Davis, she demonstrated how to read mirage patterns to determine not just wind speed, but wind direction at distance. Even Cole, his initial hostility completely evaporated, eagerly absorbed her instruction. When she corrected his trigger finger placement, "You're using the pad, not the crease. It's causing lateral pressure." His next 5 shots formed a group half the size of his previous best. "This is incredible," Morrison said to Thompson as they watched. "In one morning, she's improved every shooter here more than months of conventional training." Thompson nodded. "It's not just the technical knowledge, it's the way she sees the whole picture. Most instructors focus on one element at a time. She's simultaneously correcting breathing, position, equipment setup, and mental approach." As if hearing their conversation, Dakota called out, "Captain Morrison, might I suggest something?" "Of course. Your current qualification standards are good, but they're testing under ideal conditions. Soldiers need to train under stress, set up moving targets, introduce time pressure, require position changes between shots, make them uncomfortable." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "We've considered that, but safety is paramount," Dakota agreed. "But there are ways to induce stress safely. Require shooters to do 20 push-ups before taking position. Simulates the elevated heart rate of combat. Play recordings of gunfire and explosions through speakers near the firing line. Have spotters call confusing or contradictory wind readings that the shooter has to sort through." "The Ghost 7 way?" Rodriguez asked. "Part of it," Dakota confirmed. "In selection, they had us shooting while instructors threw flashbang simulators near our positions. Not close enough to be dangerous, but close enough to be distracting. You learn to compartmentalize, to maintain focus despite chaos." Chen raised his hand. "Ma'am, could you tell us about your most difficult shot? The one that challenged you the most?" Dakota was quiet for a moment, her green eyes distant. "Helmand Province, August 2018. Taliban commander using a school as a command post. He would only appear in a specific window for seconds at a time, irregular intervals. Distance was 1,640 meters, altitude 6,200 feet, temperature 103 degrees. She paused, remembering. But the real challenge was the wind. Sandstorm approaching from the west, creating a wind shear effect. Ground-level winds at 40 knots, but at bullet apex height, about 60 feet, winds were over 60 knots in a different direction. The bullet would literally be pushed one way, going up, another way, coming down. "How did you solve it?" Davis asked, fascinated. "Patience," Dakota replied. "I waited 17 hours for a brief lull in the storm. Got a 12-second window of relative calm, one shot." "Did you get him?" Dakota just nodded, her expression making it clear she took no joy in the memory. "Ma'am," Cole said, "I have to ask, how did you end up in Ghost 7? It's not exactly a unit you apply to join." Dakota glanced at him, considering how much to share. "You're right, you don't apply. They find you. I was a designated marksman with the 101st Airborne, deployed to Iraq in 2015. During a particularly bad firefight in Mosul, I made several shots that shouldn't have been possible with the equipment I had. Standard M14 EBR, not even a true sniper rifle. She continued. Unknown to me, there was a Ghost 7 operative providing overwatch for our operation. He saw what I did and filed a report. 2 weeks later, I was pulled from my unit for additional training. That training turned out to be Ghost 7 selection. How long was selection? Rodriguez asked. 6 months. Started with 50 candidates, all male except for me. Physical standards were the same regardless of gender. 5-mile run in 35 minutes, 100 push-ups in 2 minutes, 20 dead hang pull-ups. Then came the shooting qualifications, the psychological evaluations, survival training, language training. Language training? Chen looked surprised. A Ghost 7 operator might need to operate independently in hostile territory for weeks, Dakota explained. You need at least basic communication ability in multiple languages. I speak Arabic, Pashto, Russian, and Mandarin at conversational level. The respect in the soldier's eyes deepened further. Thompson looked at the rifle case Dakota had left open. A question had clearly been bothering him. The technology you had access to in a unit like that, was it really that advanced, or is it just hype? Dakota smiled slightly. She walked over to her rifle case and opened a hidden compartment in the foam. She pulled out a single cartridge. It looked like a standard 50 BMG round, but the tip was colored a strange matte black. This, she held it up, is a MK211 Maduro Raufoss round, but modified by Ghost 7 armorers. We call it the Key. It contains a tungsten penetrator, zirconium powder for incendiary effect, and a delayed high-explosive charge. She tossed it to Cole. It felt heavier than a standard round. But the hardware is only half of it, Dakota continued. We train to modify our dope, data on previous engagement, for factors most shooters ignore. Coriolis effect is standard, but what about the Utvas effect? If you're shooting east, the target is effectively dropping away from you due to Earth's rotation. Shooting west, it's rising. At 2,000 meters, that vertical shift is nearly 4 inches, enough to miss a headshot. She picked up a wind meter. And we stopped using these digital crutches. Batteries fail. Electronics break. We learned to read Schlieren lines, the density waves in the air itself caused by heat. If you can see the air moving, you don't need a meter. She pointed to a hawk circling far in the distance. See that bird? It just dipped its left wing. That means there's a thermal downdraft at 1,200 meters caused by the cooling rock face. That downdraft will push your bullet down 10 inches. A computer won't tell you that. The bird did. The soldiers looked at the hawk, then back at her, realizing they were learning a completely different language of warfare. As the morning progressed toward noon, the temperature climbed above 80 degrees. The wind had steadied at 15 knots, and heat mirage was becoming pronounced. Perfect conditions for advanced training. All right, Dakota announced. Let's see what you've learned. Each of you will engage targets at 1,000 meters, but with complications. Rodriguez, you first. Rodriguez moved to the firing line. Your scenario, Dakota continued, is a hostage situation. The target is holding a civilian at gunpoint. You can only see a 4-inch portion of the target's head. Complication. You've just sprinted 200 meters and your heart rate is elevated. Do 20 burpees, then you have 30 seconds to make the shot. Rodriguez's eyes widened, but he immediately dropped and began the burpees. The other soldiers watched as he completed them, breathing hard, then scrambled into position behind his rifle. His chest was heaving as he tried to control his breathing and find the target. 20 seconds, Dakota called out. Rodriguez forced himself to calm, found his natural respiratory pause, and fired. The shot struck 2 inches from center. Not perfect, but good enough to neutralize the theoretical threat. Good, Dakota said. But in reality, that 2 inches might have been the difference between hitting the target and hitting the hostage. Baker, you're next. She continued putting each soldier through increasingly difficult scenarios. By the time they finished, all of them were exhausted, but exhilarated. They had pushed past their previous limits, achieved things they hadn't thought possible. As they were policing brass and securing weapons, Morrison approached Dakota. That was the best training session I've seen in 15 years. These soldiers learned more in 3 hours than most do in a month. Dakota shrugged slightly. They're good shooters. They just needed someone to show them they could be better. Don't undersell yourself, Morrison replied. What you did today was extraordinary. General Webb was right. We need you here." Before Dakota could respond, her phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her expression immediately changed. "I need to take this." She walked away for privacy, and the soldiers could see her tense posture as she spoke. After a few minutes, she returned, her face carefully neutral. "Everything okay?" Thompson asked with genuine concern. "My daughter has a doctor's appointment this afternoon that I'd forgotten about," Dakota replied. "Routine check, but go," Morrison said immediately. "Family comes first. Always." Dakota nodded gratefully. As she gathered her things, Cole approached one more time. "Ma'am, Reaper, thank you for everything. For telling me about my brother, for the training, for being willing to come back despite having every reason not to." Dakota met his eyes. "Your brother was a hero, Cole. Remember that. And remember that every shot we take, every decision we make, should honor the memories of those who didn't come home." Cole nodded, emotion clear in his eyes. As Dakota walked toward the parking area, Chen called out, "Will we see you tomorrow?" She turned back, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. 0600, don't be late. "Tomorrow we work on shooting from unconventional positions. Hope you're flexible." The soldiers groaned good-naturedly, but their expressions showed eagerness for what tomorrow would bring. As Dakota's vehicle disappeared down the range road, Thompson said what they were all thinking. "Gentlemen, we just witnessed history. The most lethal female sniper in American history just came out of the shadows." "And we can't tell anyone," Davis added. "No," Rodriguez agreed, "but we can learn everything she's willing to teach. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Cole picked up his rifle, looking at it with new eyes. 3 months ago, I thought I was at the peak of my abilities. Now I realize I was just scratching the surface. "That's the difference between good and great," Thompson observed. "Good shooters think they know everything. Great shooters know there's always more to learn." As they secured the range and prepared to leave, each soldier carried with them the weight of what they'd witnessed and learned. They had started the day thinking they were observing a simple equipment contractor. They ended it having met a legend, one who had agreed to share her knowledge with them. The wind had picked up again, sending dust devils dancing across the desert. In the distance, the steel target at 1,750 meters stood silent, bearing the single impact mark from an impossible shot that had proven nothing was truly impossible. Impossible in the hands of a master. Tomorrow, they would return. Tomorrow, they would learn more. And perhaps, with enough dedication and the guidance of Ghost 7's Reaper, they might approach the level of excellence she represented. But for now, they dispersed, each carrying the secret of Dakota Sawyer, the woman who had walked among them unseen, the ghost who had finally stepped into the light, if only for a brief, brilliant moment. The next morning arrived with unseasonable clouds gathering over the Rockies, casting long shadows across Fort Carson's ranges. Dakota arrived at 0545, 15 minutes before the scheduled training time. She wasn't surprised to find Thompson already there, checking equipment with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that details save lives. "Couldn't sleep either?" Thompson asked without looking up from the rifle he was inspecting. "Old habits," Dakota replied, setting down her gear bag. "First one on site controls the environment. Ghost 7 philosophy? Life philosophy. My daughter's oncologist says the same thing about treatment protocols. Early intervention shapes outcomes." Thompson nodded, then seemed to gather himself for what he wanted to say next. "Your spotter in Afghanistan, Jimmy Reeves. He was my nephew." Dakota went very still, her green eyes focusing on Thompson with sudden intensity. "James Michael Reeves, 5'10", 170 pounds, tattoo of St. Michael on his right shoulder. You knew him well. Spotters and snipers share everything: food, water, security, silence. Jimmy and I spent 8 months together in various hides. He talked about his uncle who was in special operations, said you taught him everything about fieldcraft." Dakota paused. "He was right. His fieldcraft was exceptional." Thompson's voice roughened. "The report said he died ensuring mission success." Dakota walked to the range observation point, looking out at the mountains. "We were in overwatch for a convoy moving through the Korengal Valley. 14 hours into the mission, we spotted an ambush setup. IEDs, plus shooters in elevated positions. I was lining up the shot on the triggerman when our position was compromised. Taliban fighters stumbled onto our hide." She continued quietly. "Jimmy engaged him hand-to-hand to maintain noise discipline. Took a knife to the ribs but kept fighting. gave me the 90 seconds I needed to eliminate the triggerman and 2 other shooters before the convoy entered the kill zone. He died maintaining security so I could complete the mission. 28 soldiers went home because Jimmy held that position. Thompson wiped at his eyes, not caring if Dakota saw. Thank you for telling me. His parents just knew he died in combat. The details were classified. He saved my life 17 times during our deployment, Dakota said. I counted. Every time things got bad, Jimmy was there, calling wind, watching our six, making the impossible possible. The best spotter I ever worked with. He would have liked knowing you remembered, Thompson said. Before Dakota could respond, vehicles began arriving. Cole's team pulled up first, followed by Rodriguez and Chen. By 0600, 12 soldiers had assembled, word having spread about the previous day's training. Larger class today, Dakota observed. Morrison had arrived with the second group. Word spreads, even with OPSEC. These are all cleared personnel, all snipers or designated marksmen. They understand the confidentiality requirements. Dakota assessed the group with a professional eye. Fine, but we maintain standards. Anyone who can't keep up gets sent back to regular training. She raised her voice. Today we're working on unconventional positions. Real combat doesn't always give you a perfect prone setup with ideal conditions. Sometimes you're shooting through a drain pipe. Sometimes you're hanging upside down from a roof edge. Sometimes you're in a tree with branches obscuring 80% of your view. She walked to her gear bag and pulled out an unusual piece of equipment, a metal frame with multiple adjustable platforms. This is a position trainer I designed. It forces you into uncomfortable shooting positions while maintaining accuracy requirements. The device looked like a geometric jungle gym, with platforms at various angles and heights. Some positions would require shooting while twisted at odd angles, others while supporting the rifle with only one hand. Baker, you're first. Top platform, seated position, support hand only, engage the 600-meter target. Baker climbed up, immediately struggling to find balance. The platform was barely 18 inches wide and canted at a 15-degree angle. He had to wrap his legs around support beams while trying to steady his rifle with only his support hand, his trigger hand providing minimal stability. This is impossible, Baker muttered, trying to find a sight picture. Tell that to the hostage who needs you to make the shot, Dakota replied calmly. In Fallujah, I took a shot from inside an industrial washing machine. The only opening was 14 inches wide. Target was 400 meters, moving. You adapt or people die. Baker gritted his teeth, forced his breathing to steady, and fired. The shot went wide by 2 feet. Again, Dakota commanded, but this time, stop fighting the position. Accept the instability and work with it. Time your shot for the natural figure 8 pattern your sight picture is making. Fire at the same point in the pattern each time. Baker adjusted, and his next shot was only 6 inches off center. The third hit the target. Better, Rodriguez, you're next. Bottom platform, supine position, rifle inverted. For the next 2 hours, Dakota put each soldier through increasingly difficult positions. Some involved shooting through narrow gaps and barriers, others required maintaining aim while physically exhausted, still others demanded rapid position changes between shots. The soldiers struggled, failed, adjusted, and slowly improved. During a water break, Cole approached Dakota with something on his mind. Yesterday, when General Webb mentioned Operation Blackwater, the shot you refused to take, that must have been a career-ending decision. Dakota was quiet for a moment. Career versus conscience isn't a choice. It's a revelation of who you really are. She looked at the assembled soldiers. Every one of you will face that moment eventually. The shot that's legally justified, tactically sound, and morally wrong. What you do in that moment defines you forever. But the target was eliminated anyway, Davis said, having overheard. Yes, and 3 children died, 7, 9, and 11 years old. Dakota's voice was flat. I see their faces every night, not because I killed them, I didn't take the shot, but because I failed to find another solution in time. Sometimes the hardest thing about being a sniper isn't taking the shot. It's living with the consequences of both action and inaction. The group absorbed this in silence. These were experienced soldiers, but Dakota was sharing a level of moral complexity rarely discussed in training. Physical stress is easy, Dakota announced suddenly, breaking the somber mood. Now we test your cognitive processing under load. She set up a series of targets mixed with no-shoot indicators. But instead of standard paper targets, she pulled out a tablet connected to an electronic target system. "I'm going to flash scenarios on this screen," she explained. "You have 3 seconds to identify the threat, calculate the engagement, and decide whether to take the shot. But here's the catch. The information will be incomplete." Rodriguez stepped up. "Scenario," Dakota narrated, her voice changing to a clipped, tactical tone. "Urban environment. Target A is holding a detonator. Target B is shielding a child, but has a weapon slung over their shoulder. Target C is moving toward Target A with unknown intent. Wind is gusting 15 knots. Civilians in the background. 3 seconds. Go." Rodriguez hesitated. "I take Target A." "Wrong," Dakota snapped. "Target C was an undercover asset moving to intercept. You just killed a friendly, and Target A's detonator was a dead man's switch. You dropped him, the bomb went off, you just killed 20 civilians." She looked at the group. "A sniper isn't a hammer, you're a scalpel. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not pull the trigger and feed intel to the breach team instead. Cole, you're up." The scenarios became increasingly complex, forcing the soldiers to think about rules of engagement, ROE, collateral damage, and ballistics simultaneously. "This is brutal," Baker admitted after failing a scenario where a reflection in a window turned out to be a camera, not a scope. "Combat is brutal," Dakota replied softly. "Better you fail here on a tablet than out there with live rounds. The ghosts you carry aren't the shots you missed. They're the shots you shouldn't have taken." Just then, a crack of thunder rolled across the mountains, closer than before. The sky had darkened significantly, turning a bruised purple over the peaks. "Looks like our window is closing," Rodriguez noted, looking at the approaching storm front. "No," Dakota corrected, her voice hardening. "This is where the real training starts. Fair weather makes range shooters, storms make survivors. We're moving to the 1,000-meter range immediately." The group relocated to the longer range, where the wind was even more pronounced. Dust devils danced across the desert, and the range flag stood straight out, snapping violently. "This is impossible shooting weather," Baker complained. "In 2017, I took a shot in a haboob. A dust storm so thick you couldn't see 50 meters, Dakota responded. "Used thermal imaging to track the heat signature through the dust. 1,700 meters, couldn't even see the target with the naked eye. Still made the shot. How? Mathematics, instinct, and understanding that the same wind affecting my bullet was affecting the target's movement patterns. Everything is connected. Read one element, you can predict the others." She moved to the shooting line, picking up Cole's rifle again. "Watch the dust patterns at different distances. See how they swirl differently at 300 meters versus 800. That tells you about wind layers. The mirage isn't consistent either. It's dancing more violently at certain points. Those are your wind change indicators." Without seeming to aim, she fired. The shot hit center at 1,000 meters, despite the gusting wind. "Your turn, Cole, but here's the challenge. I want you to hit the same hole I just made." Cole's eyes widened. "That's a 1-inch target at 1,000 meters in 25 knot winds." 0.76 inches, actually, Dakota corrected. "And the wind is gusting to 30, but yes, it's difficult, not impossible." Cole settled into position, taking far more time than Dakota had. He studied the wind patterns, made minute adjustments, waited for a relative lull. When he fired, his shot struck 2 inches from Dakota's. "Good attempt," Dakota said, "but you're overthinking. Sometimes the perfect shot comes from feeling rather than calculation. Rodriguez, you try." As the training continued, the weather worsened. The first drops of rain began to fall, and thunder rumbled closer. But Dakota didn't call a halt to training. "Combat doesn't stop for rain," she announced. "Water on your lens changes optical properties. Wet ammunition can have different ballistics. Your position becomes slippery. Factor it all in." General Webb remained at the observation post, watching through binoculars from under an overhang, ignoring the spray of rain. He seemed captivated by how Dakota transformed the deteriorating conditions into a tactical advantage. Thompson took a shot in the rain, his scope fogging slightly. He missed by a foot. "Can't see properly," he said, frustrated. Dakota walked over, pulled a small packet from her pocket, and handed it to him. "Anti-fog wipes. Always carry them, but also learn to shoot with degraded optics. In Mosul, my scope was cracked from an IED blast. Still had to make 3 shots through the damaged glass. You adapt or you fail. As the rain intensified, Morrison finally called a halt. "Lightning's too close. We need to clear the range." Everyone began packing equipment quickly, the soldiers moving with practiced efficiency to secure weapons and gear. As they worked, Dakota's phone rang again. She looked at the screen, and her expression changed to one of resignation, mixed with something else, perhaps anticipation. "I need to take this," she said to Morrison, stepping away for privacy despite the rain. The conversation was brief, maybe 90 seconds. But when Dakota returned, something had shifted in her demeanor. The instructor was still there, but underneath was something harder, more focused. "Everything all right?" Morrison asked. "Fine," Dakota replied, but her eyes were already distant, calculating something. As everyone loaded into vehicles to escape the worsening storm, Webb approached Dakota. "That call, it wasn't about your daughter." It wasn't a question. Dakota met his eyes. "No, sir. They're calling you back. They're asking. There's a difference." Webb studied her. "American hostages?" Dakota didn't answer directly. "My daughter comes first, always." But there are 7 aid workers being held. 2 are American women, 1 is pregnant." Dakota's jaw tightened. "The extraction team needs overwatch. Their usual sniper is down with dengue fever." "Somalia?" Dakota nodded slightly. "Theoretically." "When?" 72 hours. Webb was quiet for a moment. "Your choice. You know that. The retirement was legitimate. They can't force you back." "They're not forcing," Dakota said quietly. "They're asking, and they wouldn't ask unless no one else can make the shots required," Webb finished. The rain was coming down hard now, drumming on vehicle roofs and turning the desert dust to mud. Most of the soldiers had departed, but Cole, Thompson, and Rodriguez remained, obviously aware something significant was happening. Dakota looked at them, then at Webb. "If I go, these soldiers continue training. Morrison and Thompson can run the program until I return." "If you return," Webb said bluntly. "I always return, sir. I have a daughter to come home to." She walked to her vehicle, opened the door, then paused. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out something small and placed it on the hood of Morrison's truck. A challenge coin, but not just any coin. Even from a distance, the skull and crosshairs were visible. "Ghost 7 coin," Thompson breathed. There can't be more than 50 in existence." Dakota looked back at the small group. "Take care of that for me. I'll want it back." As she drove away, lightning split the sky, illuminating the range in stark relief. The soldiers stood in the rain, watching her taillights disappear into the storm. Cole picked up the coin, feeling its weight. "She's going back, isn't she? Back to being Reaper." Webb didn't answer directly. "The thing about ghosts, Master Sergeant, is they never really leave. They just become invisible for a while." Morrison looked at the training schedule Dakota had left. She planned out 2 weeks of training evolutions. Detailed instructions for every scenario. "She knew," Rodriguez said. "She knew they'd call her back." Thompson was staring at the coin in Cole's hand. "My nephew told me once that every Ghost 7 operator carries 2 coins. One they keep forever, proof of who they are. The other they leave behind when they go on a mission they might not return from. It's their way of saying goodbye without saying it." The group stood in silence, rain soaking through their uniforms. "She'll be back," Chen said, though it sounded more like hope than certainty. Webb turned to walk to his vehicle, then stopped. "Morrison, implement her training program exactly as she designed it. When she returns, she'll want to see progress." He paused. "And she will return. Reaper has never failed a mission." As Webb's convoy pulled away, the remaining soldiers secured the last of the equipment. The Ghost 7 coin sat in Morrison's office safe, a tangible reminder of the phantom who had walked among them. 3 days later, international news reported a successful hostage rescue in Somalia. 7 aid workers freed, no casualties among the rescue team. The report mentioned exceptional sniper cover enabling the extraction, though no details were provided. The pregnant woman gave birth safely 2 days after rescue. A week after that, Dakota Sawyer returned to Fort Carson, moving a bit stiffly, but otherwise unchanged. She never spoke of where she'd been. The coin returned to her pocket. Training resumed, but the soldiers noticed something new in her eyes. Not the 1,000-yard stare of combat stress, but the quiet satisfaction of a job completed, lives saved, purpose fulfilled. Cole asked only once, "Was it worth it, going back?" Dakota had looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Every life saved is worth it, Cole. That's why we do this job. Not for the kill count, but for the lives that continue because we were in the right place, at the right time, with the skills to make a difference. She had then proceeded to run them through the most grueling training day yet, as if to remind them that excellence wasn't an achievement but a continuous pursuit. The legend of Ghost 7's Reaper had returned to the shadows, but her lessons remained in the light, passed on to a new generation of warriors who would carry her techniques and philosophy forward. Some ghosts, it seems, leave lasting impressions long after they vanish. And at Fort Carson, on the long-range qualification range, if you know where to look, you can still see the impact mark at 1,750 meters, a reminder that the impossible is just another target waiting for someone skilled enough, dedicated enough, and brave enough to take the shot.
The stories end here, but the journey continues. Many new episodes are waiting for you. And if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our EV Story channel, and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.